The Chosen Season 5, Episodes 1 and 2 came to theaters, and in this video, I'm going to talk spoilers. This is my spoiler review for Episode 1 only. My review on Episode 2 will be in my next video. I'm Steven, this is You Have Been Chosen, a YouTube channel all about The Chosen, so if you love The Chosen, please stick around and subscribe, and like this video if you enjoy it. Alright, so Thursday night, I went to see The Chosen Season 5 in the theaters, and I had a blast. It was a really good time, and in this video, I'm going to share my full thoughts. There will be spoilers ahead, so if you have not seen the episodes, there are spoilers. And also in the comments, feel free to talk spoilers. You have been warned. This is a spoiler video. And if you want to see my initial spoiler-free review, go ahead and check out this video up here. Okay, so right out of the gate, the episode opens in the Last Supper. And I thought this was really interesting how they started it at the Last Supper. It really shows that this season isn't just season 5, that it is the Last Supper season. Because if you read the Last Supper in the book of John, there are so many chapters, there's so much dialogue that Jesus gives, and it's all really good. And so I was wondering if they would make that 2 episodes, or if they would cut a lot of it. And so I really like what they're doing here, where it seems like they're actually starting at the end, and then they're going back, where it seems like the first episode ended with the high priestly prayer, which is right before Jesus leaves to go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Then the next episode opens with him telling all the disciples that they're going to fall away and telling Peter that he's going to deny him. They are all like, no, of course not. Of course that's not going to happen. It's definitely really interesting to see how each of the disciples would react, because we spent so much time with these characters from seasons 1 through 4, and now we know what's going to happen. We know they're all going to fall away. We know Peter is going to deny him. We know Judas is betraying him. This is just intense. And then the intro plays, and then it's Jesus riding in on the donkey. He is stopped by some Pharisees who tell him to stop, tell him that this is going to lead to his death. They tell him to silence his disciples, and then he quotes that verse from Luke about, I tell you, if they are silent, the very stones around us will cry out. And man, there was just a heartbreaking moment in the scene where Judas seems to lead the shout, Hosanna. And man, that was heartbreaking, because I know how it's going to end. I know that Judas is going to turn. He's not going to have this passion that he has for Jesus now. So that was just heartbreaking. And it was interesting how there was a moment where Yusuf could have followed the disciples, or he could have gone with the Pharisees, and he obviously chose to go with the Pharisees. But you can see that he seems to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and yet he doesn't want to announce his faith, right? He doesn't want to confess it, and so he's wrestling with that. He's not publicly declaring that like the other disciples. He's sort of a secret follower of Jesus, which I talked all about that in my last video. And we got more about the Watcher. The Watcher is obviously writing all of this down. I made a video where I talked about how, because he has the stylus, because he's writing all this down, I think that he's Mark, because I believe that Mark was one of the eyewitnesses. I think he was writing about himself when he was talking about how he was a young man and he was fleeing. And if you do some research on how the Gospels were put together, there's many scholars who think that Matthew and Luke got a lot of their gospel from Mark and from another source. Also, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are considered synoptic gospels because they're very similar, whereas John is different. I think that Mark was an eyewitness. I know some people think that he got a lot of stuff from Peter, and maybe he did, but I think he was actually there. And I do think we will see him in The Chosen. There is a theory that the disciples stay at his house in tradition and for the Last Supper, because Peter in Acts talks about staying at the house of John Mark's mom. With the Watcher writing all this stuff down, I think this has to be someone who is an eyewitness writer. After watching these scenes, I'm leaning more towards Luke. And I really hope The Chosen doesn't go in that direction. I don't want it to be Luke, because I believe that Luke didn't come along until later. There's a chapter in Acts where Luke is the writer of Acts, and he's writing about Paul and everyone else on the journey, and then he instead of talking about them, he switches them to us, to we, because Luke joins them on the journey. So we don't actually know when Luke believed. We don't know if he ever encountered Jesus, although it seems that in his gospel and in Acts that he didn't encounter Jesus, that he is collecting the eyewitness accounts from other people, and a lot of people think he wasn't an eyewitness. And so we know when Luke joins Paul, but we don't know when he believes. So I don't know. It could be someone else. I saw somebody say it could be Stephen, which would be interesting. This person doesn't seem to be Jewish. This seems to be maybe a Gentile with great respect for Jewish custom and tradition. And yeah, he's very observant. He sees Yusuf change out of his Pharisee robes into a disguise, showing that Yusuf believes, but he doesn't want to make that known. And before I get into the next part, just about the triumphal entry, there was only a little bit that they showed us in the trailer, but I mean, man, The Chosen does a really good job of having real sets, real people, real extras. This isn't CGI, the amount of people. There were actually hundreds of extras that were actually there, and you can feel it. You can feel how big this moment is, and I love that because in reality, it was big. It was a huge deal that Jesus was proclaiming to be the Messiah, and that he was riding on the donkey fulfilling prophecy, and that the people thought that he was going there to overthrow the Romans. And so that was a huge deal for them. That's why they were shouting, Hosanna, save us, right? But Jesus had another mission to save them, and that was to die for them, to die for all of us. Even with that, and how big and how fun and how awesome that was, and how just mind-blowing that was to see, it was also like whenever Jesus stopped and he saw the blood on the wall and he started weeping, like I knew exactly what that was referring to. I've talked about that in a couple of my videos, and I had that prediction of, yeah, Jesus, he's gonna start weeping, and then it's gonna cut to some flashbacks. And it didn't really cut to flashbacks then, but it did give us a hint with the blood on the wall of what it was referring to. At first I was thinking, oh, is he thinking about like when he's going to be killed? And then I was like, oh, okay, it's the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which was an intense scene for sure. And I'll get to that later on. So Jesus enters in on the donkey, and then it immediately goes into the passage about how Jesus is telling them how he's going to die. A grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, and it will bear much fruit. That's him talking about how he's going to die. He says, now my soul is troubled, but what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. Father, glorify your name. And then a voice comes from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And I predicted this. I thought this was really cool how they showed it. I was wondering how they would do it. It almost sounded like Dallas Jenkins' voice. I don't think it actually was, but whose voice was it in the thunder? I feel like I just heard the first part. God says, I have glorified it. I didn't hear the second part, and I will glorify it again. And so when that second thunderclap happened, I thought that was going to be the second part, and I was wrong. Maybe there was more to it that I just didn't hear. I'm not sure. Let me know what you heard down in the comments. And I do want to mention that The Chosen got this wrong, how the Greeks were supposed to seek Jesus before this happened, but they put this in episode 2 to set up what's going to happen with the money changers. And also Jesus comes riding in on the donkey, and then there's just a bunch of people walking around him, like just walking by as he's teaching this crowd of people. I feel like everybody there would be in this crowd because Jesus gets off the donkey and he immediately is teaching. And I feel like those people with the palm branches, what happened to them? Where did they go? There were some interesting things that they're setting up in these episodes. For example, Peter talking about how he wants to preach, which is obviously leading up to the book of Acts, where he does preach the sermon, which maybe that's how The Chosen season 7 will end. Maybe that's a hint towards that being the ending of the show, fulfilling the character arc of Peter. Also, Mary Magdalene and John starting to get it. That was really interesting. I loved how they were more observant. I think they're setting that up for John's going to be the one at the cross, and Mary Magdalene is going to be the one that goes to his tomb Sunday morning. They're setting it up for that, whereas the other disciples are going to be hiding out. The Watcher encounters Cophny. I made a whole video on that, so I won't really cover that. Oh, it was interesting how Pilate tells Atticus that there will be 3 crucifixions on Friday. I definitely thought that they would arrest those zealots in this season, because there's a shot in the trailer where Atticus and some Romans are breaking down the doors of a house, and it seems like they're arresting somebody, but they could just be trying to look for somebody, maybe trying to look for Jesus potentially, which I don't think would have happened. I don't think the Romans would have been looking for Jesus at this time. Really, scripture doesn't tell us anything about what the Romans thought of Jesus, except for the centurion who believes, and the executioner who realizes he's the Son of God, and then Pilate himself, who thinks that Jesus is innocent and doesn't really seem to care as well. He just wants to maintain the peace and everything. Leave your guesses down in the comments. Who's Barabbas? Who are the thieves on the cross? Do you think we'll see maybe flashbacks to when they're arrested? I have a theory on who I think one of the thieves on the cross will be. I also want to make a video on Barabbas, on who I think Barabbas will be. I think he will be a chosen character, or at least somebody connected to other chosen characters, so I'm going to make a video on him eventually. The disciples go to Phoebe's house, which Phoebe is a reference to the Phoebe in Romans, I believe, which is super interesting. It's interesting we don't actually get to see Phoebe, but she will be coming in later, maybe in the way of the chosen, assisting Paul in his missions. I wonder if they're setting other chosen characters up for that as well, like maybe Gaius, because there's a Gaius in the New Testament. He's an elder named Gaius. He's in one of John's letters, but those are written way later, so I don't know if Gaius would still be alive at that point. And then Jesus goes off on his own. These episodes weren't as emotional as other chosen episodes in the theaters have been, but man, I was not expecting to tear up when I did. I teared up at the wedding scene. And this was surprising for me because I've seen the wedding scene a few times because they put it out on YouTube. And I mean, I always thought, yeah, this is an okay scene, whatever. Why is this in Holy Week? But I liked it because it shows us the perspective of just some of the people in Jerusalem at the time who had seen Jesus come in on the donkey, and like what they were doing, what they were up to, and how they would react to Jesus if he just showed up after the triumphal entry and everything. And Jesus trying to conceal his identity and disguise himself because he's one of the most famous people in Jerusalem for this whole week. So I thought all that was really good. And the fact that it was a kid that recognized him, and this kid knew that he was the Messiah, and man, that was making me tear up a little bit, just like seeing that and seeing everybody bowed down. It was just really cool to see, a really awesome moment. Yeah, I think seeing that scene in context, that made it a really great scene. And then Jesus overlooks the court of the Gentiles, and he sees people exchanging money, and then he says that passage from Luke. Would you have known the things that make for peace? Your enemies will come, and they will set up an embankment around you and surround you on every side, because you did not know the day of your visitation, which I talked about in a previous video. And I thought this was going to be at the beginning. In my predictions video, I said, The Chosen always starts its first episodes of each season with a flashback or a flash forward, and we've seen these flash forward scenes, so I thought we were going to see this at the very beginning, and then Jesus was going to think about it later, which he does here, and quote that passage, which he does, and then he thinks about it. Yeah, so I was wrong on the timing of it, but I was right that it would be in episode 1, and that Jesus would be, I guess, seeing the future and seeing what will happen. I thought that was really well done. It was just a really intense scene, and like the special effects were very well done. There was a cameo from Dallas Jenkins, which wasn't like an obvious cameo, like, oh, that's the creator, that's Dallas Jenkins. No, it was like, if you know, you know. You can't really tell, especially in the theater, because I was sitting in the back of the theater. I couldn't tell at all that it was him, but I knew it was him because of the behind the scenes and everything. Seeing them take the menorah, I was just like, like, you're not supposed to have that. It was intense for sure, but I thought it was really well done. And just seeing the emotion, the anger start to build up in Jesus, that was super well done. Jesus goes back to the house. He tells Zebedee to take the women to Lazarus's house, and John overhears this, and John follows Jesus as Jesus gets the bridle, and then he dismantles the bridle and he makes that into the whip. And I just thought that was a really interesting connection because, yeah, where did Jesus get the pieces for the whip? But it also shows us that he doesn't need the bridle anymore, that he knows where this is headed. He knows he's not going to ride on a donkey or a horse or anything anymore, but that he is going to die at the end of this week. And so he doesn't need that bridle anymore. He'll ride on a white horse eventually, but he doesn't need an old bridle for that. And it was cool that John was the one that saw this because John is the one that writes this down in his gospel. And of course, it's placed at the beginning of the book of John. I won't really get into like there's different perspectives on it. Was this 2 accounts? Was this 1 account? If you want to hear more about that, go ahead and check out my video on the turning of the tables. I did that last week. But yeah, overall, I think this was a really strong start to The Chosen Season 5. What did you think of this first episode? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want to see my review on the next episode, you can watch that right here. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like, share it with a friend, and stick around and subscribe for more Chosen videos. Hopefully I'll see y'all in the next video.